Welcome to Vintage Super League, where
Hello
I've been
and
missing
welcome.
for a few
Yes.
weeks. Sorry about that, Rich.
Well, have to carry on traditions, of course.
Yeah.
Can't miss out on that.
I'm sorry. I'm excited. I'm ready to go here. I've been out of the action.
No, I'm excited too. We ghosts get to watch the two remaining people fight it out.
Yeah, unfortunately, on a more important level, we're both out of the action. But what can you do? The only players left are Webb and Luis. They are the only players left in the action, and we get to watch them play as many as 5 matches tonight, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, hopefully we'll get the full 5, as LSV would say, for value.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this. I think LSV is LSV. He's been rock solid through the entire VSL. Webb is the newcomer. He just cut through the play-in tournament, barely defeating Nick Detweiler in a really, really close series. And he's just been on such a tear through the entire season.
Yeah, I mean, he really has been crushing VSL. He's been... did he even lose any matches in multiple... Like, it was for a while, like, he won a bunch of matches in a row, right? Like, it took him a long time.
He did win a bunch of matches in a row, yeah. Yeah, so, I don't remember what his final record was. I think it might have been like 7-2.
Yeah, he locked pretty early. So and so far, our best of 5s leading up to here have been really entertaining. You and Luis had a really epic 5-match battle.
That was a lot of fun, yeah.
And then I know I missed the Luis-Eric match, but that also went to 5 matches and was apparently quite entertaining.
Good matches.
So,
yeah.
So hopefully we'll get another one of those.
I hope so.
Yeah, I have a couple quick tidbits that Randy wanted me to communicate. Randy may or may not be in the booth tonight. Our technical producer, Athena, is on the road, doesn't know if she's going to be able to take over, so Randy may be performing all the magic behind the scenes tonight.
That's true. He's going to try to let us do commentary. If we get too terrible, he'll pull us out and replace one of us. But
that's true. It could happen. I get the tap all the time. Just Chris, you got a seat. The other big news is there's an Asia Vintage Championship that is taking place in a week and a half or so, a week from Sunday. It's invite only. And they're doing a Japanese language stream live, but then 2 weeks from today, we are going to bring you a English language stream of that tournament. So that should be pretty cool. I think Randy and Eric and Luis or Rich, I don't know if you're taking part in that. I don't think we figured out who else is doing the commentary yet. But
I think we're figuring that out, yeah.
You know, there's 2 Hall of Famers. All right, so two Hall of Famers are playing in this tournament, Shuhei and Philly Asuka. And our own Steve Menendian is making the trip for the tournament. And
as his former Vintage World Champion, Ito.
Right, so we've got 2 Vintage Champs, 2 Hall of Famers, and then I think 18 other players. There was including one who won a European qualifier. I don't know who won that, but there's at least one European going to the tournament as well. So it should be cool. I like these small tournaments.
This should be a small tournament filled with a lot of really good players.
Right. And you get to see, I don't know if there'll be any metagaming or not, but obviously we see a bit of that in VSL. I don't know if these players know each other well enough. They certainly don't.
There's an active and interesting discussion on the Mana Drain about the degree to which the fact that we play 3 matches and we know who our opponents are affects our deck selection. And I think that's unavoidable to a degree, right? I mean,
it's definitely, to be honest, it's kind of a discouraging part of Vintage Super League for me. I don't particularly enjoy that part of it. And it's definitely, it's true. Like, whenever you play Eric, you know that there's some potential he's going to have like 4 back to basics in his deck or 4 energy flux in his deck. And none of the other players really are quite as extreme about that, although I think Luis has now joined Eric in that route more often. I don't think anyone else in the league really quite takes the approach that they do as extreme. And I think it's gotten worse as people have figured out. Like, it used to be people would metagame and kind of bring anti-shops cards against me, but now that shops is better, I feel like there's all this next level. Like, I know I'm going to bring the shops deck that beats shops, and It's true. I think it affects deck selection quite a bit. I still think
I think so.
I still think, and I think you would agree with this, that there is also just a fundamental disagreement between the kind of vintage, the non-VSL vintage community and the VSL players on what the actual good and viable decks are in vintage.
I think so. I definitely think that if you go in the Mana Arena and you look at what people say, you get much less of a Storm representation. And if you look at real life Magic, you see Storm showing a lot less than you do in the VSL. And I don't know if that's because it's easier to spend more time calculating your Storm turn. I don't know if it's physically easier to play on Magic the Gathering Online, or if there just happens to be a number of people in the VSL that prefer Storm.
Yeah, I don't know either. All I know is that you see a lot more of the vintage deck lists that like the Restoration Angel deck that used to be kind of popular, whatever that.
Oh yeah,
Blue Angels, I guess is what that deck was called. No one in VSL,
right?
That's like a deck that I just don't see anyone really playing.
So I think part of why you see this really is just small sample size, and if you look statistically at the way you can gather data, we only have 10 data points. At any given time, you only get 10 data points. What that means is that no deck can be existent but still less than 10% of the metagame. So a lot of these fringe decks like Blue Angels or, even Dance Magic Dance, you're not going to see these decks because they would often occur as well under 10% of a given metagame. And so you're much less likely to see them.
But I would say, for example, there was a long period of time where in the vintage tournaments on the East Coast, they were more than 10% of the top 8 metagame. They may not have been more than 10% of the metagame, but if you looked at the top 8 from every tournament, I would say they were more than 10%. I just think that there's...
I think if you count Bomberman, you get to that, but Bomberman's not really playable in Magic the Gathering Online because...
That's definitely a problem. Although it might be playable in VSL. I think we talked about this before. Where people
I think it might be. I think we can, we might not have gentlemen's agreements not to play workshops or bazaars, but maybe we could have a gentleman's agreement to not let someone time out as he's going off with Oryx Salvagers.
Right. But I still think that there is still somewhat of a fundamental disagreement. I'm sure that some people on the Mana Drain believe that we're not playing decks for some weird metagame reasons, and I think that people in VSL just don't believe there's a wide swath of actual tier 1 decks.
I think so. I think the deck that I see most talked about in the on these discussions online are decks like Human Aggro or
Hate Bears kind of thing.
White Weenie, yeah, right. And I don't think those are particularly good, but they have their vocal proponents.
Right. I mean, I think that I guess you could make an argument, and those decks are usually kind of good against generic blue decks, you know what I mean? And we don't get a lot of generic blue decks in VSL.
There's some definition of good, sure, yeah.
Right. I mean, maybe that is somewhat of a metagame thing. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely don't enjoy deck selection in VSL. I don't like the idea that I'm going to be punished. There's just a lot of hoser cards, I feel like, more in VSL than if you went to your local vintage tournament. And I hate the idea of picking a deck and then just losing 2 matches to hoser cards. Because I don't expect vintage to feel like that. Like, that feels like more of a legacy and modern thing. And it's part of what I don't like about legacy and modern. Especially, I used to play a lot of Delver in legacy. And then, you play against the Blood Moon Chalice of the Void guy. And you're like, all right, you got me. I'd rather not
have what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I think part of what makes the Eldrazi deck so good in those formats is that the hate cards are so limited. I mean, you get Ensnaring, Bridge, and Worship, but you really have to go out of your way to stop it.
I think you were one of the original haters in VSL when you had the what do you call it? The artifacts for my lands don't untap.
Oh yeah, Sabo's Web, yeah.
Yeah, you had 4 Sabo's Webs against me. I think in week 5.
But you still defeated me. I defeated me. That's for me. That just made me think that workshops are just too good. And,
I've always thought the workshops were too good. I never really thought that was. I mean, I switched to workshops at the end of kind of like, I played in the local vintage scene for about 2 years, and at the end of it, I was playing all workshops, and I never really changed my mind. The Treasure Cruise, there was a Treasure Cruise section where maybe that wasn't true.
I think workshops are really good. I think they've gone from tier 0 to tier 1, which is nice. I think until they restricted Chalice, it was just wrong to play things that weren't workshops.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of the Chalice restriction. Now, I don't think anything else should be restricted from workshops. I think workshops are good and healthy exactly where they are now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been calling for that Chalice restriction for like 3 years, so I was very happy about it.
Yeah, I was happy about it too. Chalice is just not a good card, and I know I've seen people advocating restricting Lodestone Golem. I cannot agree with that. I think I think that would be a mistake.
No, I would actually, if they were going to hit another card, I think I would actually say Sphere of Resistance. But some people do want to hit Workshop, which that's a different philosophy. I mean, I don't think there's any. It's hard to come up with a real reason except we want there to be Workshop decks to not restrict Mishra's Workshop. I mean, obviously, in Magic, we want there to be whatever decks there are. We would rather have every deck be legal, but given pure power level and what constitutes a card that should be restricted, Mishra's Workshop, I think, is far. I don't think Mishra's Workshop is a reasonable Magic card.
I think it's by far the best unrestricted card, and I think it's better than half the restricted list. But I still don't want it restricted because I think part of what gives Vintage its unique characters, you get to do horribly broken things. Mishra's Workshop is horribly broken, but it doesn't really synergize with a lot of the other horribly broken things.
Right. So you're saying that Mishra's Workshop is the thing that makes it so that other people don't get to do what's fun about Vintage?
No, I'm saying
that. Argument.
I'm saying that if you play Workshop, then you're not playing Time Walk and Ancestral and Tinker and Gush and all these other absurd Magic cards. So the reason I don't want Workshop restricted is that for Mishra's Workshop is what you get by giving up all of those other stupidly broken cards.
Yeah, I just don't think that the Workshop decks lead to good gameplay. I mean, if they did, it would be different.
I've had some great Workshop games. I think Chalice made them miserable.
We have had some great Workshop games, but a lot of those great Workshop games have been because there have been interesting Workshop mirrors because people in VSL have been playing with some strange cards. We've had just as many non-interactive workshops versus different deck games as anyone. I mean, we've had plenty of
those with blue too. Turn 1 Tinker is just as much of a non-game as anything else, and turn 1 Ritual Necro is also a non-game. I think
those just don't happen as often. I mean, I just don't think that's disputable. I think workshops win a huge percentage of their games by their opponents simply never being able to cast a spell, and they do it with cards that aren't restricted.
They do, but they don't get as many restricted cards. I mean, outside of the power, which you can, put into your blue deck or your workshop deck, the only workshop restricted cards that you have are Chalice and Trinisphere, whereas the Storm deck is just a giant pile of restricted cards.
Right. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's just a difference in philosophy. I just don't find. I agree with you, except that to me, it's like, would you want a card that said it was like a ley line and it said 48% of the time you win the game? that deck wouldn't be broken.
Of course, that would be broken, and I think Mishra's Workshop is horrendously broken.
You lose 48% of the time you win. It just flips a coin to start the game. It wouldn't be a broken card. You'd lose most of your matches. I don't think we'd want it to be legal.
I think there's more to workshops than that. For one thing, I think if you want to beat workshops, you can. Look at that Odd Oath deck that I made. That deck is really good against workshops.
How good?
My friend Brian Schlossberg, who's a good workshop player, said he's tested 10 matches against it and lost all of them. And Brian's someone who regularly finishes really well in tournaments, often top 8s.
That seems impossible that it went 0-10 in matches. But
yeah. I'm just reporting what I've been told. But with
it's
Chalice
kind of
restricted, I think Workshop is much more beatable.
I agree. I think it's a combination of I don't think it's as impressive as it was. I still think that when the best deck in the format is one that's primary goal is so that no one ever does anything. I mean, imagine if Lantern was the best deck in Modern. That would just be pure misery. Who would want that? You might. I know there's crazy people who would love that, but
Lantern's pretty fun.
And there's the other fundamental thing I don't like about shops is that by definition, it doesn't matter what cards you lose so many games where you don't cast a single spell. It's almost like by definition those games it didn't matter what your deck was. Like you could have 15 anti-shops sideboard cards, and I mean I know you're going to say, well, people can go first turn Tinker Time Walk also, but I just don't think it happens as often.
I think that Workshop itself is too fundamental to what Vintage is, and I think
that's coming from a very biased. I think it's fundamental to what people who have been playing a lot of Vintage over the last 5 years think it is, and I don't know if a new player coming into Vintage would think that was that great. Like if I was a new player and I went to a Vintage tournament and 2 of my losses were matches to Workshop where I never got to play a spell, that would not make me want to play Vintage.
It totally depends on what you want to do in Vintage. I mean, someone I watched get into Vintage when I was living in Pittsburgh got into playing Workshops, and he was having a lot of fun with it. And we're seeing a flourishing of innovation. If you look at the Vintage tournament that we saw recently, the Calvin's Black Magic Invitational tournament, I think there were 3 different types of Workshop decks in the top 16. You had innovation. I know Nick Detweiler and Will McGrath.
How many cards are you talking about? I just feel like people treat Workshop decks differently. Like if people had a bunch of Time Vault decks that had 7 different cards, people would never call it 3 different kinds of Time Vault decks.
Wow, this had Dark Depths and Expedition maps in it. And remember, for a very long time, Vintage was nothing other than blue decks with a little bit of variance. And
I agree.
I like the fact that we have a really good non-blue deck. I think that was good. And I think it's healthy.
Yeah, I would just rather play. I just don't find the Workshop thing interesting. I just don't find no one casting spells interesting. I would rather have I would find everyone on blue decks way more fun. I know people don't agree. I know there's people who just who don't want it to be all blue. I would love if it wasn't all blue. I would love for there to be green cards or white cards you could play in Vintage that weren't just Swords of Plowshares and Fast Bond. But for me, to eliminate it being all blue by having a deck that just prevents people from ever casting their spells is about the least interesting way we could possibly eliminate blue.
I don't know how else you'd offer a viable alternative unless you want to play Dredge.
Well, I'm saying that there's got to be some way to construct a Vintage set where I don't know. It's possible the blue cards are just too good and there's nothing you could do. They could print cards in other colors, like in Commander sets or something that would be Vintage playable. I don't know.
You'll just splash blue. I mean, you'll be playing your Time Walk and your Ancestral with these cards. Mishra's Workshop.
Is that bad? I mean. Are there really people who want to get into Vintage but don't want to cast Ancestral Recall?
Well, yeah, people who play Workshops.
I don't know. If you don't want to cast Ancestral Recall, my attitude is play Legacy. If you want to play Vintage, it should be because you want to cast Ancestral Recall.
I play Legacy because I get to play 4 Brainstorms. But I think that having the option of a really strong Tier 1 non-blue deck that has a good combo matchup is important. I think that contributes a lot. I also think that the Workshop Mirror is some of the most interesting Magic I get to play.
I love
blue mirrors, but I really like the Workshop Mirror too.
I have liked some Workshop. Sometimes the Workshop Mirror does genuinely seem interesting. I agree with that. We've got some good Workshop Mirror matches in this league. Definitely true.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I think Arcbound Ravager adds a lot to the fun things that can happen.
I wish the card Crucible of Worlds did not exist, because I think that
the card Crucible
really brings a miserable aspect to the Workshop Mirror as far as I'm concerned. I think the Workshop Mirror would be much more interesting if people if there wasn't that aspect of it, but you can't have. I mean, it's vintage. You have a lot of cards, and there's nothing.
I mean, yeah, I agree. It does. I mean, we had that terrible standoff between Landstill and Workshops where both players had a Crucible and nothing happened for 1,000 years.
I mean, that's fine if you get one of those games every once in a while. I mean, that's what's great about Magic is that every 4 seasons in the Vintage Super League, we finally get a game where nobody does something for 45 minutes or however. I think that's cool. That's a great part of Magic. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that a large chunk of Magic players don't think that having a deck, like I said, I think that if Modern was 20% Lantern Control and Lantern Control was considered to be the best deck but not too good, I don't know how many people play it. I think everyone would much rather play against Eldrazi in 30% of the rounds than Lantern. So it sounds like the match is ready to go, but unfortunately we do not have Webb's hand cam. So we're just going to have to go without it, I guess. So I guess we're going to go down to the match.
All right.